Welcome to the screencast, Integrating Evidence into Your Writing. Part 2, Reporting Verbs, Signal Words, and Quotations. This is a graduate writing workshop from the University of Saskatchewan, and my name is Heather McWhinney. I'm Graduate Writing Help Specialist at the university. I'd first like to review the learning outcomes with you. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to integrate evidence from your sources into your writing to support your claims and points, and use reporting verbs and signal words effectively when integrating evidence. And you should also be able to quote judiciously. Here's an overview of the presentation. First, we'll define and provide examples of reporting verbs. Then we'll do the same for signal words. Then we'll move to quoting and learn when it's appropriate to quote. Finally, we'll discuss how to integrate quotations into your writing. What are reporting verbs? They are verbs used to introduce ideas or evidence from sources. Some examples are found, propose, suggest, and conclude, but there are many more. And it's important to recognize that reporting verbs have different meanings and to use them correctly. It's also important to use them in such a way that your reader knows which ideas are yours and which come from your sources. And there are examples in the first presentation on integrating evidence, which show the integration of sources. So I encourage you to look at those. On this slide, we have a table that shows common reporting verbs in the left-hand column and their use in the right. So let's just review this table. So starting here in row 1, we have suggest, argue, claim, maintain, contend, assert, and propose. These verbs are used to present a scholar's argument or position. Note, though, that suggest, although it's very commonly used, is not as strong as the other verbs, but it is widely used to present a position. In the next row, we have according to here. According to, of course, isn't a verb, but it too is used to present a scholar's argument or position. In the next row, we have study, research, report, investigate, examine, develop, describe, and show. These verbs are used to explain what a scholar or researcher did. So for that reason, they're usually used in the past tense. And find, on the next line, a very commonly used reporting verb. And it too is usually used in the past tense to report research findings. Then we have conclude, which is used to explain a scholar's interpretation of his or her findings, followed by agree, accept, and concur, which are used to show a scholar agrees with something or someone. And then in the next line, we have verbs of disagreement, disagree, challenge, dispute, call into question, and differ. So they show a scholar if a scholar disagrees with someone or something. And in the final line, we have these three verbs, mention, says, and actually said, which is the past tense of says. And I put them there because I'd like you to avoid using them. Why? Well, they're pretty casual. And so they suggest that something doesn't really matter, especially the verb mention. If you use mention, it suggests that something was only said or written in passing, that it really wasn't that important. So I'd avoid the word mention or the verb mention, but you can use mention as a past participle mentioned with as. So you can say as mentioned earlier to refer to something that you've already stated in your paper. On this slide, we have some examples of reporting verbs used in sentences. So the first sentence here, Ash suggests that sentences for impaired drivers are typically too lenient. So that's a pretty straightforward sentence presenting Ash's argument about sentences for impaired drivers. And then in the next sentence, we have, as Ash suggests, sentences for impaired drivers are typically too lenient. And I wanted to show you the second use of suggests here with as, because when a reporting verb like suggests or argues or contends is used with as in this way, then it has a completely different meaning. In this sentence, writing as Ash suggests, and then sentences for impaired drivers are typically too lenient, the writer is saying, I agree with Ash. I agree with what Ash suggests. So if you use this phrase, as plus author name plus reporting verb, then you are actually stating agreement. So it's an interesting use of this phrase. In the next line, we have another sentence. Muriel et al. And Sodek found that energy consumption was reduced when radiant panels rather than all air systems were used. Very typical use of the word found here to describe research findings. And then in the last sentence, we have scientists generally agree that apomixis promises substantial economic benefits in transforming the agricultural commercial landscape. So here we have the expression of agreement with the reporting verb agree. And notice that in most of these cases, the reporting verb is followed by that, which is very typical when you use a reporting verb. But there are some verbs that are not followed by that. And these verbs are listed on this slide. They are typically followed by a direct object. So the first verb is provide. Here's the example. Axelson et al. Provide insight into the reasons why provincial spending patterns tend to converge. And then describe. Taylor describes the processes that occur during the developmental stage of the flower. And finally, discuss. Wenzel discusses the many ways that scientists in the Arctic have used traditional knowledge in the past 50 years. So these verbs are not used with that. And note as well that we don't say discuss about. We say talk about, that may be too casual for academic writing, but we do not write discuss about. We write discuss plus direct object. I'd like to move on now to talk about signal words or connecting words. Signal words and phrases are expressions used by the writer to guide the reader through a paper. They're very important, actually, very important parts of a paper. Examples are first, second, third, additionally, but, however, although, and conversely, though there are many more. And they're important because they're signposts that convey information about logical connections, relationships, and the order of ideas to your reader. On this slide, we have some common signal words in the left-hand column. In the right, their use with some examples. So let's start at the top here. Similar, similar to, similarly, likewise, both and, also, not only, but also. Very common expressions. Students, however, usually tend to focus on just the signal word also. And they don't use similar, similar to, similarly, and likewise very much. And I would encourage you to do that because these words can really add a feeling of professionalism to your writing, and they're very useful in showing connections. So let's see them in use here. Gupta found that adolescents' concentration skills are sharpened by time spent on social media. Similarly, May observed that teenagers ... Both May and Gupta found ... Jones also found that ... In similar research, Smith concluded that ... Likewise, Frankenstock. You probably wouldn't use all those connecting words in one paragraph, but these illustrate how they are used. And similar, similarly, similar to in particular are widely used in academic writing. Other words that show similarity: comparison, comparable to, compare to with, correspond with, related, related to. Here are some examples. The Canadian results are comparable to or correspond with those of a similar sized French study by Robert. In related research, Brown found that. Then here in the next row, we have verbs that express difference. Sorry, not verbs, signal words that express difference. So we have contrary, on the contrary, on the other hand, in contrast to, unlike, conversely. And here are some examples of these words, these signal words in use. Contrary to or unlike or in contrast to Kim, Gupta found that adolescents' concentration skills are sharpened by time spent on social media. Smith found that, on the contrary, adolescent skills are dulled by social media. Conversely, Brown found that, ... And the signal words in the last row also express difference. So we have whereas, while, however, although, but, nonetheless, and notwithstanding. So here are a few of these in use. Whereas Smith found that time spent on social media dulled adolescents' concentration skills, Gupta found that it actually sharpened these skills. However, it should be noted that Gupta's study had a small sample of only 12 subjects. And I've noticed in student writing that students don't tend to use whereas very much. And it's a very useful a very useful signal word to express a contrast or difference. Now let's move on to talk about quotations. The surest way to lose your writer's voice, your authorial voice, is to use too many quotations, especially long ones. So what happens with long quotations is that the original author's voice, your source's voice, argument, and logic intrude into your own argument and logical development of ideas. And professors actually prefer paraphrases and summaries. Why? Because they show that you understand an author's ideas and evidence and how they support your own argument. And there are some disciplines that have no tradition of quoting. But you remember, you still have to use quotation marks and include the page number if you use 3 or more words in a row from a source. And see the presentation in this series on avoiding plagiarism for more about rules for quoting. You should use quotations only in these circumstances: when the author's words are particularly striking and paraphrasing them would detract or take away from the strength of the statement; when you intend to analyze in depth the precise language contained in the quotation, say in an English paper, for example; or when the authority of the author's actual words lends support for your arguments. If you're writing, say, a political science paper, you might want to quote somebody who's considered a real authority in the field. And finally, when using official or legal material or technical terms that should not be paraphrased. There are basically 3 types of quotation. There's a short quotation, which is a quotation of less than 40 words that's integrated into the grammar of your sentence. Then there are parts of a quotation, words or groups of words extracted from the original quotation and then integrated into the grammar of your own sentence. And then finally, block quotations. These are quotations of 40 words or more. APA or MLA or other citation guidelines require such quotations to be set off from your paragraphs in what is called a block quotation. Well, if you do integrate quotations into your sentence, I suggest using parts of quotations. Why? Because they're easier to integrate into your sentences. And so how can you integrate quotations into your sentences? Well, you may need to leave out parts of the quotation that maybe aren't as important to the point that you're making. And also, if you leave out words, then you'll shorten your quotation, which is a good idea. And so to do that, to indicate to your reader that you've left out words, you use 3 dots, or also known as an ellipsis. And this indicates that those words are missing. Another way of integrating grammar or integrating a quotation into the grammar of your own sentence is to actually alter the grammar in the original. And so you can, for example, maybe your sentence is in the past tense, but the quotation is in the present. Then you can alter the verbs in the quotation so that they're in the present tense. That kind of thing that kind of change you might want to make. And you can do that by using square brackets to indicate that you've made a change. So you put brackets around the words that you've changed or where you've made the alteration. So here's an example. Baker makes a strong case for revising the guidelines, which have not been rewritten since 1967, arguing if they were revised, the communication problems would be solved. So here, this is just a fictional example, but I can assume that the original perhaps actually had the name of the guidelines, which I didn't want to repeat, so I just used they instead and put square brackets around the word that I'd replaced. And then I use an ellipsis because the quotation would have been too long otherwise. So these are very useful tools to help you integrate quotations into your sentences. So I encourage you to use them. So to sum up part 2, reporting verbs are key tools for introducing evidence and ideas from your sources. And signal words are also key tools. They are used to guide your readers through your paper. And they're particularly important because they reveal connections, relationships, and sequence that you want your reader to notice. Quotations, however, should be used sparingly. If you do use them, integrate them into your own sentences using ellipses and square brackets to subjugate the quotation to your own voice.